Hello and welcome back to the Northern Rose podcast, and today we wanted to talk about our experience talking with the far right at a recent Unity Rally in Stockport. Okay, so to set the scene a little bit, on Saturday we went to a Unity Rally that was set up to celebrate diversity and show that everyone was welcome here.
Yeah.
Really, and there were a couple of far-right agitators, as there always tends to be, and after speaking a little bit with some of the people who had attended for the purposes of the Unity Rally, we then took the opportunity to speak with some of the people on the far right.
Well, we did. We actually tried to talk to them first off, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because one of them was straight away, he was abusing, people just walking to the rally. So we did try and talk to him straight away, but he said, I won't talk, I'm not talking to you. You'll just edit my words, blah, blah, blah. You can just go to my channel and see it. So he wasn't actually interested in talking to us, was he?
No. A lot of them weren't, to be honest. But from the conversation, really, we had a chat and we've recorded it. But
so this was after. So we talked in the rally. We interviewed some of the people there, and I think they saw us doing that, didn't they?
Yeah.
So then we decided, well, we'll cross over, because there was a kind of a cordon, wasn't there, between the far right protesters and the people at the rally.
Yeah.
So we crossed over, and we just said to them very politely, will you talk to us, because we want to know why you're here and what you hope to get from this.
And some of them did, didn't they?
Yeah.
One of the first things that came up, and one of the first things that comes up in a lot of our comments as well, when people talk about the far right, is people go, well, we're not far right. And it's actually quite ironic, because I was thinking about it, that people on the far right, because they are on the far right, and we'll explain why they are now, but they want to avoid having a label, which is like almost so ironic that it's actually funny.
It is, yeah, and it's a thing that's really a common theme among these kind of commentators. I think it stems from like Fox News and those kind of areas, like Joe Rogan as well, where they do have some agreement on social issues, right? There is certain things where they think like billionaires shouldn't exist, or they question the kind of wealth inequality. So they say, well, we can't be far right because actually we're interested in some of the same issues, yet they fail to see what makes them far right. And that often comes down to ultimately their solutions for these problems.
Yeah, so today we wanted to really kind of challenge that rhetoric a little bit, and really after talking to these people, show where the contradictions are. And we're not doing this to really take anything out of context. We're just doing it simply to show where there are flaws in logic. Yeah,
because what we found really was that actually a lot of the problems within the country, we kind of agree with a lot of problems that are going on, but then we have different solutions. Our solutions are based on state redistribution, really, or state solutions, whereas theirs are, in many ways, they've lost complete faith in politics, yet they want mass deportations. That's kind of like this kind of magic bullet solution that they believed in. Or that it seemed to me that was their kind of solution to the problem.
One word that keeps floating around, I think, on some of the content that I consume, is that the far right, it's like this nihilism. So being a philosophy doctor, do you want to explain what that is, nihilism?
Yeah, so nihilism, typically associated with thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, who would say that there is no meaning in the world. He's famously associated with this phrase, God is dead and we killed him. And with the death of God, people think, well, there's no meaning to be had with that. Like, how do we find a purpose in the world without God? And if there is no meaning, well, what's the point in anything? And I think that's one of the kind of symptoms of many of these far right groups, is that they really do struggle to find meaning in the world. Yet they do often, and this is something we found as well talking to them, is that very interested in Christian fundamentalism and things like this. But actually, I think this meaninglessness is not because God died, or the idea of God died for many people, but actually it comes from the inability to have social mobility, to acquire assets, to contribute back to your local communities or be involved in your communities, which are actually problems with our socio-economic system, not because of our ideology or because we decided to, not put all of our eggs in the God basket and actually think, God is not responsible for all good in the world or all bad in the world, but actually we are, and that agency is on us, not on God.
So, without further ado, I'm going to have a crack at defining the far right. So,
let's see
for me,
how you do.
Yeah, see how I do. So for me, the far right is ultra-conservative views. So, for example, on the topic of migration, a typically right-wing view for migration might be to be heavily restricted migration. So when you think about people who may be described on the right, so for example, Suella Braverman, she would want very, very strict controls on migration. Mm-hmm. She's a right-wing politician.
Yeah.
But to be far right is to say that you want, when people start talking about remigration, which is just another word for saying like deportation, isn't it? It's just like coded language. So that if you're, and I'm not sure anyone would, but if you're sitting there thinking, I think remigration is a good thing, but I'm not far right, I'm afraid you're wrong. You need to do some thinking, because you are. And a lot of people, and in this conversation that we had, people were saying that, far right is a term attributed to 1930s politics, so it's not relevant today. Well, I'm sorry, it is. And if you believe in deportation, remigration, you are far right. And I'd also say things like religious extremism is part of far right rhetoric, and that can go for any religion. Mm-hmm. If you're Islamic extremist, Christian extremist. And
also one thing we find is that there's discussion about Christianity being this sort of really inclusive, open religion, and every other religion being sort of the opposite of Christianity, and wanting to convert everyone, and basically the moral core being about violence and taking over the world, which is a really interesting position to take, considering that colonialism was primarily done by white Christian nations.
Well, you just look at like Latin America.
That's just which is that I mean, so. This is a contradiction that I felt when we were talking. It wasn't even really worth getting into that, because if you believe that Christianity doesn't have, it's all about peace and reconciliation and great values of love and equality, it shows a real lack of historical knowledge, really.
And yeah, I mean, the Pope made a deal with Mussolini, who was a fascist. So, because when we're talking about this religious extremist, it's what I've got here is that one of the guys who was part of, like, I guess the far right agitators, he claimed that people who were at the Unity Rally were possessed by the devil. So yeah, I'd say that would probably make you far right as well.
I think it's not actually that useful and in our interest to pigeonhole people as far right, because nobody likes being told what they are. And we are really nothing. We are just
like a collection of ideas and experiences.
Yeah, we're a collection of beliefs and ideas that make up really our identity, and that identity can change. It's not set in stone. Nobody is born far right or far left. So I think it's important to say, actually, really, all you are is a collection of your beliefs. And if some of your beliefs are all the problems in this country are the result of the other, so the external group, whether that's trans people, people of colour, migrants, whatever that other group is, if you blame them, you're likely to be far right. Whereas I think what the left would say, or the far left would say, is that problems are actually caused by the in-group, which is we create these hierarchies where there's a top elite class and a bottom group of who typically are exploited. Well, they are exploited by the lower group to ensure that the top group remain on top. Yeah. And this is kind of Marx's analysis of the class system. Now, I don't think politics in the UK right now on the left is about changing that structure and doing away with it. Well, it is about changing it, but it's not about doing away with it, because in the current geopolitical climate, that just seems miles away. But what we are interested in is the redistribution of resources, because it's simply unsustainable that the top 0.1% control 99% of the resources.
Yeah.
You know, if the top 50 wealthiest families in the UK own more than 50% of the population, it's simply not sustainable, because they cannot spend that money. They cannot. It's not working for the economy, because those resources are simply stationary. They're not moving. Whereas economic growth is the fluidity of resources flowing throughout the economy. And so that's really what the left are interested in now, is how can we liquidate those resources from the very wealthiest, liquidate some so that they flow back through the economy and stimulate growth.
We had a chat that we filmed with someone on the far right, and we kind of had a bit of an editorial dilemma, didn't we?
We did, yeah, we did.
We didn't know whether to include it within the video that we made on the Unity Rally, because just on the interest of wanting to represent everyone who was there, we thought we would include it. But after some time to think about it, we decided not to, because we didn't want to platform people with extreme views. And honestly, thinking back over the conversation, they are extreme views. So that was a decision that we made. Whether people agree with it or not, that's up to you. And to be honest, I would like, if you do have opinions, I would like to hear about them in the comments, to be honest, because it's interesting. But when someone, so what we've decided to do instead is, I've made notes of the conversation. And it's not in my intention here to misquote anyone, but simply for us to talk about the issues that were raised. And I feel like this is the most responsible way of doing it. So should we get started?
Yeah.
So the conversation was between Adam and a far-right person who has a significant following on YouTube. And, you know, they've published the chat, albeit slightly edited, towards the end, which we'll get to, which we'll mention when we get there. But it's got about 30,000 views, which is mental, considering we don't get that many views. But
well, yeah, and we've talked in previous podcasts about how views from the far right seem to be amplified to a much greater extent.
So yeah, we honestly didn't really want to be part of that. So what I've done is I've made notes of the conversation. So we're going to talk through how the conversation went, and we're going to analyse little bits to really talk about the contradictions that occurred. And really, so what I'm thinking is, if you're sat there and you're watching this or listening to this, is that you can kind of be aware of the flaws in this far right rhetoric, and we wouldn't be aware of like these views had we not spoken to them. So it was an interesting conversation for us, and we learned a lot. But from this conversation, we're now able to provide you with what their views and opinions are, but also we're able to analyse them in a way that we think is beneficial. Yeah,
because ultimately we fully understand the worries about platforming people with views that are very hateful, and the people themselves often have accusations of abuse, not just verbal abuse, but physical abuse. So I think we wanted to take those concerns into consideration. But we did find in the conversation that there are clear points of agreement that then allowed us to get to actually points where we said, well, you know, they agreed that there's a cost of living crisis, which we'll get to in a minute, but they also agreed that social mobility is no longer available. And it's like, once you kind of reach these agreements, you go, well, can you not see then that kind of the state needs to step in and to redistribute? And though it's that kind of finding out where there can be that agreement offers, I think, a route into dealing with the rise of reform, which we have to engage with. We cannot just ignore it.
Yeah, so the first topic that was immediately raised was, well, why do they call us far right? As it's not applicable today. But I think we've addressed that already. in this video. So then the thing after that, which was then raised, was why lefties support ideologies that have destroyed economies and led to the deaths of millions and millions of people. And why would you listen to someone like Karl Marx, who died destitute and came up with communism from the help of a wealthy friend being Frederick Engels. And Frederick Engels being a guy that was sent over to Manchester from Germany by his father to learn the industrial techniques that were being used in Manchester. So they met in Manchester, Frederick Engels, I think. Did they meet in Manchester?
Yeah.
Yeah, they met in Manchester, and Frederick Engels really subsidised Marx's writing. So yeah, do we really want to get into that?
When we were talking, I didn't bother because I just think that these conversations, first of all, nobody there is talking about communism. Nobody at the rally is talking about, actually, although I think people would say communism, it does seem like actually a utopian vision of the future. This isn't what people are talking about right now. They are talking, especially at the rally we were at, they are talking about simply protecting the most vulnerable people who are struggling in a cost of living crisis.
And to show people that, there was a quote to say that people, when they go to the corner shop, they get racially abused. And the purpose of the Unity Rally was to really show that these people are, they should feel welcome here. That this is not something that we as a community would stand for.
So I think the far right, I think people on the far right feel very comfortable in a space where they can talk about communism because they can go, well, we've got all of these facts and we've got this kind of, people have got this historical prejudice against all of these ideas. And so really there's no point, in my view, there's no point engaging with it because we're not even talking about communism. We're talking about sort of increasing taxes on the wealthiest people in society. That's not communism.
And then all of a sudden, it's like about Stalin.
Yeah. So my view is, first of all, just simply don't engage with that narrative. Don't engage with that framing. It's not helpful. It doesn't do anyone any good because these are not the actual problems that we're dealing with.
So then you said that, well, really the issue here is class.
Yeah.
And the response was that class isn't really the issue.
Not even that. I think he said class isn't real, or he didn't believe in class.
He said, no, he did, but he said class is only temporary.
Right.
Which is, again, I find a bit contradictory to this idea that we are who we are, and that can't. Well, we'll get into it more as we go on, but yeah, it said that class is only temporary, which when you came back and said that, well, without better distribution, class is actually entrenched. Mm-hmm. So class is, as things are going now, it is not temporary. It has led to an entrenchment of class. Yeah. So the idea of social mobility now, because if I've seen the graphs of, like, for example, if you're a graduate now trying to get jobs after AI, you are in a bad place.
Well, exactly, and that's it, isn't it? Is that he talked about that idea of social mobility, which is actually what a lot of people would like to believe in. They think social mobility is, kind of the goal of social democracy, to offer people the opportunity to work, to gain skills, to have an education so that they can move up the classes into the middle class and maybe even reach kind of the higher classes, or you shrink the higher classes and you build the middle class. Either way. And this is the point I was trying to make to him, is that actually everyone here believes in social mobility. They want to believe that, we could move from a system where there are workers who are exploited and have no assets. Everyone wants to be able to have a home, have a place to live, feel secure in their finances. Nobody disagrees with that. It's simply that is a myth now for many people. Like, education is no guarantee of social mobility anymore. In fact, that's why so many graduates feel disaffected with politics, because they realised it was a myth. Actually, all that was waiting for them was a dead-end job that offered no significant improvement to their lives.
Yeah, so then you replied by saying, well, would you agree that if 10 families in the UK own more than the bottom 50%, of people in the UK, that is a problem. And he agreed. However, we need to fact check you there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not actually the top 10 families. It's the top 50 families own more wealth than the bottom 50% in this country.
Yeah.
Which might change their mind if but I think,
well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I would have thought, let's say that they fact checked me, they knew the stat, which would have been interesting in the first place, but then I went, actually, it's the top 50. Does it really change anything? 10 to 50 families, more than 50% of the population. And it's like, it doesn't change anything. It's still a completely disgusting gap in wealth.
And I think that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the
and the thing is that the fact that they didn't even question that shows just how we all know that this inequality is
well.
Just
there was an
disgusting.
agreement that the cost of living is a problem.
Yeah,
Everyone with a set of eyes can see that.
of course.
That this is a problem, and I think that to an extent is kind of why some of the far right agitators were there too, because they see that this system isn't working for them or their families, and they're looking for someone to blame it on.
Yeah,
So
and, that's the thing. A lot of people who are turning to the far right are the ones who are suffering the worst from the cost of living crisis. But the failure of politics and politicians to address inequality, to actually help them, is contributing to their turn to these radical alternatives that tell them, politics has let you down, come to us, we have the answers. And that's Nigel Farage, who is a snake oil salesman. He's saying, I have the answers to all your problems. I won't really set them out, but it's something to do with deportation.
Yeah. So then after that conversation about the top families owning all the the lion's share of wealth.
I think,
in this country.
I asked him if he thought it was sustainable.
Then you said, well, maybe we should address the system, which is then when the reply was then about communism and talking about how like leftism is the same as corporatism, and I have heard that before, but but then again, you pushed back and said that people at the rally, they don't want state ownership of these private companies. It's just simply a fairer distribution of wealth, and one way of doing that would be a wealth tax. And Gary Stevenson has banged on and on and on about this.
Nobody there is arguing for the state to take control of everything. Of course, people want our natural monopolies, and he agreed with this. These natural monopolies should be state-owned.
So they agreed that water and trains.
Despite the fact that there was complete nihilism again or complete pessimism about politics. But agreement that, water companies should be state-owned, because you can't just... There's no competition there. You can't just go and get your water supply from someone else. No one else is going to build new railways. You just have your railways, and they are operated by a company that can then, if it's not state-owned, it will be a company that's ripping you off because there's no competition. And so there was agreement, I think, about the problems of who owns what. Natural
monopolies. So I don't think everyone is outraged by the way that Thames Water's being run, aren't they? So but then at that point, the conversation then moved to about how communism creates a new class of people, which, again, I think this is kind of when people may feel a little bit out their depth. It's then to talk about how bad communism is. And
it's a safe place for the far right to return back to.
There is no way of defending someone like Stalin, is there?
No, and also, none of us there are historians in Russian history as well. Yeah. And it's like taking that specific historical example and being like, now this is my sort of ace. This is my card that beats any of your arguments. And it's like, ultimately, we're talking about our context right now, the problems that exist for us. Nobody's suggesting communism. They're talking about more distribution. But then it's like, it's completely sort of abstracted.
Well, I think it's quite interesting because they talked about this small group of ruling class people that communism or revolutions create, which, you could argue right now is like that 50 families that own 50, more
than
wealth
50%,
But we were told that creating this group of people is never a good thing because people are inherently, and this is a quote, people are inherently selfish and tempted to commit crime when the offer is good enough. And like now that's a philosophical point, isn't it? We then cross over a line of politics at that point.
Well, then that's when you get into ultimately beliefs about human nature.
Yeah.
And I think that is a real, it shows you the mindset that, again, it comes back to that point about nihilism and believing human nature is fundamentally greedy, selfish, not interested in others. And it is a philosophical argument. It goes back to, is it just the social contract that maintains order? But I would argue that that's not human nature. Human nature is actually, it can be anything.
Which is what you pushed back on. You said, well, how can people be inherently selfish when in the past people have died for others?
Or even now they'll make choices that are not in their own financial interest or in their own, people will do things that aren't in their own interest but for the greater good, to use that cliche. They'll do things that, for instance, people that work for, say, like state prosecution, they could leave and go and work for a private company and earn way more, but instead they work for the state because they believe in it. There's many civil servants that could leave and go and work for a private company, make way more money, but they don't feel that gives them the meaning that they get from working for the state. And
so is it a position where you kind of think there's no morals? Like no one has any morals, basically.
The thing is, I think there are. It's really interesting because I think there are sort of morals going on, and they feel a camaraderie with other far right activists. So it's funny that they can actually see that they would risk their own health for their mates, their own far right mates.
Yeah.
But they also think everyone's selfish. And it's like, actually, if you could reflect on what you enjoy about being part of a far right group, it's the brotherly kind of love that some of them feel for each other. And actually, if they were to turn to the left, they would also find they could have that same camaraderie, but their solutions for changing their material situation would be different. So rather than blame the hatred that comes with blaming other groups and shouting sort of obscenities at people, it would be actually, let's come together, let's work together, let's build these coalitions. And again, on the left, it's never worthwhile to say all rich people are evil or they're monsters, because they're not. In most cases they're not. It's just the system has enabled wealth to be accumulated, and it's ultimately down to us if we allow that or not.
Well, it was like Nelson Mandela said as well, you can't blame the person, you blame the system.
Yeah,
so if you're a rich person and you benefit from the system, that anger should be placed on the system, not necessarily the person, because if someone is ultimately acting in things that do benefit them, I guess you can understand it, but does that make it fair? No. Or
well, Nelson Mandela and his Desmond Tutu and his government enacted one of the bravest things that and one of the most important things for South Africa ever, one of the bravest commissions. It was called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which basically said, after apartheid ended, that if you come forward and you tell us the truth, we will not persecute you further. Now, that is a really brave step, because there's people out there who they want blood. Yeah. Their families, their friends have been murdered by a vicious regime that's basically persecuted black people for years and years and years. But they said, if you come forward and you tell us the truth, you tell us where people have been buried, you tell us what happened to them, we will not persecute you further, and we'll not take it further, and we will offer you reconciliation. And what that did was it allowed wounds to heal. So rather than a civil war occurring, which was the fear that the white South Africans would have a war with black South Africa, actually that allowed them to come together and heal. And that was so important for the country. It's not perfect now, by no means, but that allowed that allowed them to move forwards rather than split apart. And I think that's the case as what we have to see now, is that the very wealthiest have to be met with, this is about helping everyone. And actually we can say, if you help us build this future, there's truth and reconciliation there. It's not about blood. It's not about being anger. It's not about getting revenge. It's about improving all of our material circumstances.
Which is what the politics of jealousy, is it?
Which and also what was interesting is the far right protester we were talking to was South African, which was really interesting. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, continue on, Henry.
So there, it got a little bit about how there was a bit of agreement about how no one wanted to have too much power concentrated in the hands of too few people. Like there was agreement there.
Which is another interesting point, because on the far right, there's often, this idea that a strongman leader is needed. A leader with absolute power to, wield over everyone else. Yet there was actually, with the man we were talking to, he actually said that, didn't he? He was like, absolute power corrupts. Yeah, so he was interested in the redistribution of power, which is a leftist idea.
Yeah. Which again, when we started this video, we did kind of want to talk about these contradictions. So there you go. That is one. But there was also a little bit about how, so what was your idea for the future? How can things improve? So the agitator, it wasn't really, more just an observer at that point, but I'm sure has been an agitator.
Yeah. To be fair, the ones who were agitating, they just wouldn't talk to us. Yeah. He was actually interested in talking to us. The other ones were, they had the megaphones and shouting abuse.
So in the interest of fairness, we'll say that. So then there was like, well, what would you then put forward? And the answer was to improve yourself, wasn't it? And make yourself stronger. Yeah. And then other people around you can be stronger. And I think, okay. But then there was a bit of talk about like this blank slate equalism. I think that's the term. But anyway, basically there was the talk about, because we were getting into the conversation now. So it was starting to turn about genetics, which, when you start thinking about far right, there's only one way that this is really going to go. So they talked about if you want to make the world a better place, you've got to make yourself better, which is when you said, well, can you not educate people? And the reply was...
just before you say that as well, I fully agreed with that surely making yourself better is, of course, what anyone would agree with. Yeah. Like, of course, making yourself better is a good thing. There
was a bit of that, you can't control what everyone else is doing, so you've got to make yourself better, which I totally agree with.
And this is where I think, if you want to say,
so you spoke about, well, can you educate people to really improve,
that's part of improving yourself, you'd assume, is education, learning things, knowledge.
Well, how else would you improve yourself?
Exactly.
Even within physical improvements, there's a level of education that surely you must, like, for example, your diet, what exercises to do, that's part of the education. And you said, the reply was, and it's a quote, you can't educate people to be better. Education can only do a bit, but overall, no. So
it's another pessimistic take
view
on the human condition, which is really interesting, that you can believe that you can make yourself better, but not for everyone. It's like, I can make myself better, or that's what people should do. But then also saying, on the other hand, not everyone can do that.
Which is like, I don't know how you get to that. Position.
And I think it comes from in sort of the right-wing ecosystem. There's a belief that education has failed,
because someone did say, didn't they, that they didn't believe in education at all.
Because I think there is a belief that the education system has kind of indoctrinated people into sort of like a liberal democratic or like wokeness. Whereas it comes down to, again, like, I think most of us would agree that the education system has failed, but reason for education failing is that it makes people. The education system does not provide people with practical skills, or like does not actually enable them to engage with the world as you do when you leave education. But their problem with education, I think, is that it's not like it's not teaching them the right things. Which again, it's like we kind of agree, but their solution is, I'm not actually fully sure what their solution is. I think it's probably like a eugenicist education, whereas I think for the left, an improved education system would be actually to enable more freedom for children and allow them more freedom and not, contain them in the way that they currently are.
Because it was actually quite interesting because, and I'm not saying the people there would suggest a Hitler Youth style of education, but take Bert Troutman, for example. Apparently he was top of his class before entering the Hitler Youth, and by the time he came out of it, he was really poorly educated. When he was put into like re-education camps here, couldn't do like basic, maths and stuff. And you're thinking, well, what was he being taught then?
Yeah, well,
when you talk about like,
yeah.
for example, like your mathematical ability,
yeah,
that's kind of like a space where there is not really much, unless like much room for subjectivity.
Well,
unless it's an Orwellian kind of 2 + 2
The
=
Trump
5.
government are doing this exact thing right now, which is basically dismantle the Department of Education so that states have discretion about what they teach. So they might choose in southern states to teach that actually slavery wasn't a bad thing.
Because there was a quote, wasn't there, that came up? It was something like, the effects of slavery are overrated, or something like that a while ago.
Or you've got like RFK Jr. saying that vaccines don't work, and measles actually make you stronger in the long term, and there's like these. It comes down to like not looking at sort of facts or historical evidence anymore, or like consensus. It's just sort of like vibes based, and I think this is part of it. Is that on the right, and I felt this talking to, is that more of it is about like charisma and vibes than actual looking at evidence, like looking at history and what history has to teach us, and like where inequalities are. And actually it's about, what do you feel? And I think that plays into, he was talking about, this comes about, like the tribe and how you motivate each other, and it's about how you feel inside more than what you can learn up here. And like he said, he doesn't believe in education, or that he doesn't believe everyone can be educated.
Well, the quote was, education can only do a bit, but overall you can't educate people to be better. Which is like crazy, because then, like, how do you learn things? I don't know.
Well, I think it comes down. What it comes down to is, if you take it to its natural conclusion, it is that there is a bottom class of people who will always be at the bottom, and it's this kind of.
Which is where the conversation kind of went, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And this actually has been cut from the video that they posted on the YouTube, this bit, because like I'm going to be honest, it's openly racist at this point. So should we get in? Should we get into it? So there was a bit of talk about Africa, wasn't there? There was a bit of like, because we were talking about systems of exploitation, and you said, well, take Africa for example, and along these lines, and there was a bit of talk. Well, a lot of the countries in Africa had arbitrary borders, didn't they? They were just
I think that was the thing. He tried to insinuate that African countries are poorer than Western countries because the people cannot learn or naturally.
Well, what the exact conversation was about was that there was no African in this African language that he was talking about. I can't remember which one it was. Was that there was like no long-term planning involved in the language. Yeah. It was all about impulse. Mm-hmm. So he was saying that naturally African people are just impulsive.
Yeah, and he was trying to say that they can't plan for the future. And I remember saying, well, if you look in the Bible, in Egypt, Joseph was responsible for planning.
To balance that, he was talking about sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, and
again, I don't know where he got this idea that in sub-Saharan Africa there is no planning. That countries do not plan ahead.
Well, because so just to play devil's advocate here, he was saying that, for example, in Europe, the seasons are a lot more predictable, whereas in Africa the seasons aren't as predictable. So you get these random weather events that people cannot plan for, which, you know, I mean, and as we were talking about Africa, he said about malaria that people in sub-Saharan Africa are better fighters there because they've developed to not die from malaria. So I think the quote was along the lines of, people don't die from malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. And when you hear something like that, you're like, what? Like, that is crazy. So I went
malaria, which is the biggest killer.
90% of global malaria deaths are in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, I mean, that's a situation where that's one where it's like a conspiracy theory, isn't it?
So to add a bit of nuance to that, because maybe this is what he was thinking about, is that apparently if you have sickle cell anemia, which is a genetic disease within black people, you can't then contract malaria. But that's got nothing to do with like this idea of like genetically developed to be resistant to malaria. It just happens to be a coincidence.
Yeah.
So, you know, it kind of went down that road a little bit.
I think that what was interesting about that is that there was the insinuation, and the idea was that white people, effectively the idea is that white people are more intelligent because they can plan ahead, whereas black people cannot plan for the future. Yeah. And that is ultimately a racist idea that has no, like, it's got no truth or legitimacy to it. And that's the thing, is like, you don't have to do much research, much education to simply see that that's the case. And, you know, he was saying like these countries are poorer because of their inability to plan. It's like, they can plan. What do you mean they can't plan? Of course they can plan. They're poor because they've been exploited by colonialism for decades and decades. And even now there's still exploitation. And, you know, he agreed when I mentioned that in Sudan, you know, the UAE is funding arms to the paramilitary, and then you've got also the Russians with the Wagner group that's still operating as mercenaries for hire, and you still have colonial roots throughout Africa. And it's this idea that like, but it's all their fault because they couldn't plan ahead.
Yeah, it's like there's no Western influence in Africa.
It's and you know, it was these arbitrary borders that were drawn throughout Africa that decided, you know, these territories are these, rather than looking at how before colonial expansion happened, there was simply tribes and families that lived in throughout different regions, and they didn't see themselves as these nations, but it was enforced and pushed upon them as by countries that were like, we own this patch of land and you own that patch of land. But this, I think when I started talking about colonialism, I think that is where you find a certain... He was engaged about cost of living, but I don't think he wanted to engage about the ideas of colonialism.
Yeah, because I think that was when we kind of passed over, didn't we, from like kind of a political discourse into like the really murky territory. And then at that point, you know, like where we were going now, I would say that is openly racist.
Yeah.
But had that gone further, there's like, I felt that maybe having rewatched the conversation as well, you're slowly getting backed into the corner. It's like, for example, me and you can sit here and we can say like, oh, well, we both agree that there's unfair levels of wealth distribution in this country. Now, what do we want to do? What are our practical solutions? But in that conversation, it kept going back and back and back.
Oh, yeah.
And the only place it was then going was to then that there was like genetic supremacy.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, like, I mean, that was ultimately, I think that was, again, when... Because we could see that this is where it was going. This is why we stopped the conversation when we did. But I think, of course, the context is important because, again, he was South African. Yeah. And I mentioned when he shared a lot of that he was basically pessimistic about the ability of politics to change the world. And I said, well, there are examples of politicians who have changed the world. For instance, Nelson Mandela managed to change South Africa and get rid of apartheid. And obviously he did not like that.
No. Yeah.
And I think
that didn't go down well.
No, exactly. And I think that is kind of that it raises the contradictions again, doesn't it? Where it's like, don't believe in political change, yet there are clear examples of hugely significant political change, but it's like, but they didn't think that was good change.
Yeah.
Because again of the ideology of white supremacy, and actually black people then created all the problems that modern South Africa has, rather than, you know, rather than it simply being problems that are created in any kind of democracy. Problems exist, and you know, there's no perfect world, which is interesting, isn't it? Really, when they say, you know, communists just believe in a communist in a utopia. Yeah, this idea of like a perfectly white nation would be some kind of utopia. You know, if you deported everyone, would that be utopia? It wouldn't, because inequality, and this is, you know, we will be sharing a impassioned speech that Nish Kumar made. He made this exact point, and I think he made it beautifully, which was to say that deport as many people as you want, you'll never solve the problems of inequality, which are the deep-rooted problems that are creating these conditions that we find ourselves in.
Well, it's just like, well, you know, and people have talked about it a lot, but when you deport one group of people, and that doesn't solve your problems, who are you going for?
Well, look, it's like Brexit, isn't it? You know, you do Brexit, supposed to solve all the problems, suddenly wasn't leaving Europe that's the problem, it's migrants. But just to give one idea of, I think, the ideological hold that is on the far-right activists, that when the interview stopped, I was talking to a number of them, because they were quite engaged. They actually wanted to hear.
They did.
They actually wanted to hear what we had to say, and I said to them, "Look, let's say that all of you here, all of us, everyone in Britain was now financially secure, but you had to accept the level of migration as it is today, and that all the people who have migrated here can stay. Would you be happy?" Their answer was no, unanimously no. They said, "Oh no, but our values would be under attack, our Christian values." And obviously what those values are is, again, they're not the same for all of us. But then I said, okay, well, let's take the same situation, but we'll say, and none of your values change. So you're all financially secure, everyone in the UK, and all your values stay the same. Would that, but you have to accept the levels of migration as they are, and every migrant gets to say, would you be okay with that? No. Still no. Because it's not about any of these arguments that they really have. It's ultimately a deep hatred of people of colour. And I think that is the thing that's why I think we don't want to platform this kind of rhetoric, because that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And like, you can take apart the arguments, and that's why we think it's useful, because you can take apart the arguments, and maybe you can say to someone, look, if you actually embrace that love of your neighbour, these so-called Christian values that they support. Because I said to another one, I was like, well, what about love your neighbour? It's like, well, even Jesus might have you know, had a problem with this amount of migration. I was thinking, do you really think Jesus would turn away a migrant? But I think this is the thing, is like, actually you get down to it, and it's not about the values, it's not about any argument other than we just don't like people of colour.
Yep.
And that, I think if we can actually deconstruct those arguments, and you can say to someone, you know, look, if that is really your fundamental belief, you know, like, what benefit does it do you? You know, just because it fills you with hatred, do you really want to be full of hatred your whole life? Hatred of the other? Or do you want to be happy? Do you want to have community? Do you want to find people who will welcome you in, like the rally was about? It was welcome anyone and everyone. Solidarity.
There were even offers for the far right agitators to come and join them. You know, like I mean, I don't know. I don't want to speak for people, but the idea is that no matter like what or who you are, that and I used the quote for the thumbnail, was like, we all want to look after each other here. And I
think that's what I noticed was, I think there is there is a loneliness epidemic. I think it's
Yeah,
easy
yeah.
to go online.
That's
I think
clear
it's
now.
easy to deconnect
Yeah.
from society and the world. And I think actually, if these communities, if it wasn't so easy to disconnect, you know, to almost isolate yourself from the real world, then you wouldn't be able to go down these rabbit holes. Because, you know, you often hear as well from people on the far right, they're like, oh, actually, you know, my neighbour who is a migrant, he's great, but he's not the problem. And it's like that idea that these, again, these narratives that are pushed by the algorithms because they are full of hatred, which gets views, gets clicks, so then, you know, it's a negative cycle. These narratives convince people that this is the problem. And, you know, it's not in these huge corporate interests to push narratives that are like, you need to strike for better working conditions. You need to demand that your employers treat you with dignity and respect. You need to demand that your pay keeps up with inflation so you're not taking a decrease. And this is the point, is like, ultimately, we're currently set up in a system where certain narratives gain way more traction than others. And we're trying to contribute to the side of working issues, but we need help, you know, we need help. People like Gary Stevenson's done a great job and he's got a great platform, and there's others who are doing an amazing job, but we have to make this the normal conversation, which is about redistribution. And the conversation about migration, like, this is another thing, like, everybody would agree that nobody wants illegal immigration. Nobody wants
This is what I said.
people coming over who are like, who basically don't have anywhere to go, or don't have any papers, or aren't able to work. So what you have to do is you have to offer legal routes of migration.
Yeah, and it's just like about checks and balances as well. And they go, well, they come over here and they do this and that and the other. And I go, no one wants people to come here and like commit crimes.
Yeah, nobody's arguing for that. Nobody's saying, oh yeah, let people come over and commit as many crimes as they want. Nobody's saying that.
Then I say to them, well, look, we have got a mental health care crisis here, and if asylum seekers came over here and they may be suffering from post-traumatic stress, that would be a reasonable thing.
Trauma. Of course it's going to be traumatic.
So if we had an effective mental health group that could go and analyse them and make sure that if people were, you know, they had certain concerns, that they were under the sufficient supervision, that would eliminate all of these issues. And people go, well, who's going to pay for that then? It's like, we've got the answer.
Yeah.
Like, it's there. And if we had an efficient asylum seeker, like, system, processing system, like, and I'll just say to them as well, like, the money that is then being paid to these people that would work in that asylum seeking process, mental health, where's that getting spent? In our communities. But right now, and I've talked about it before, and this is what I told them too, is that all that money that we spend now that then gets spent with private companies, it's not coming here, it's going to California, it's going to America.
Hedge funds.
Yeah. New York,
yeah.
wherever.
And it's like, you know, so it's like the cost for how much salience this argument has. Illegal immigration probably costs less than 0.5% of the UK budget. We'd have to check that, but it's like, what is it, 30,000 people, probably around that. I don't know, we'd have to fact check that as well, but it's nothing like what we imagine it to be. It's way less. But, you know, the cost of migration, of illegal migrants to this country, imagine what the cost of tax avoidance or tax evasion is.
It's like what Joe Wright said. It's not... the cost of even just tax breaks in this country.
Yeah, tax breaks.
It's enormous.
Yeah, and so, you know, ultimately, we are only able to make decisions based on the information we have available to us. That's why it's not useful to say people are thick or dumb, except for we said Rio Ferdinand.
Yeah, Rio Ferdinand gets it.
But it's not useful to say that, because people just are acting on the information they have, and what that information is dependent on in many cases what their media diet is, and the media is so stacked against the left that it's really hard to get actual useful information about what is creating these inequalities to people. And that's why, you know...
But to balance that out, but the things that you do see on the left as well, it's always like high controversial things, highly controversial things, because that's where the engagement is.
Yeah.
So when people sit there and they see like leftist views, that's not necessarily representative of a normal left person, because they're not shouting louder. They're just wanting a more accepting, safer country.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that oftentimes, like, the agreement that we had about, like, okay, cost of living crisis, okay, should, current inequalities unsustainable, that isn't what's getting the clicks, is it? Like, the agreement isn't what is the popular, isn't getting the engagement that's driving the algorithm to push it. And I think that's the thing. That's why ultimately, us sat here talking to you isn't gonna change enough. You also have to and that's where we all come down to. Personal responsibility to some extent is what we all have to do, is we have to be talking to each other, because ultimately what's more powerful than people talking to each other about ideas rather than finding it online or through a social media platform where executives make decisions in their interest on what is fed to you more than other things. Like, if you're getting your information off X, the world's wealthiest man is deciding what you basically more of what you see and don't see. And this is why I think...
But he's openly manipulating his AI platform. That's clear to see.
Well,
there was something like saying that Elon Musk, and I'd have to double check it to make sure it was right, but Elon Musk would beat Mike Tyson.
He changed Grok's algorithm so that basically whatever you asked it, comparing it to Elon Musk, it would say Elon Musk was better at. So, for instance, it would say Elon Musk would be the best piss drinker in the world. Or Elon Musk would be would be able to beat anybody in a fight. And there were certain questions like, Grok, would you save all the world's children or Elon Musk? And it would save Elon Musk. And this is the thing, is like, he spends billions and billions of dollars on an AI bot that just tells him how great he is. And that's like the situation that we've got to.
This is a guy whose ego is so fragile that he pays people to play video games for him.
Yeah, to say he's the best in the world.
Yeah, and like this is, and when people talk about free speech and censorship, this is the problem now, is that the people in control of where people are consuming their news is billionaires. So they are never going to be the ones to admit that they are. Well, I mean, look, I don't know. Some of them might, but I don't know any of them that are.
Yeah,
so
it's always been a problem that the richest have been able to control the means of communication. So printing presses, if the wealthy people own the printing presses, they make the most papers, what they want people to see is the most seen. And that's why we need to get back to a place. And the BBC was, to some extent, the public broadcast was supposed to be in our interest, so that we see the information that is most important to us.
Well, it was designed to be a regulator.
Yeah, but ultimately the BBC, to some extent, it's fair to criticise, because there's been capture by the wealthiest in our society. It's very, it's very upper middle class. It doesn't really.
It doesn't represent the country.
It doesn't, like, do you know any BBC employees, any reporters, any journalists? If you don't, then it probably isn't representing you well enough. And that's the whole point, is like, ultimately, local media should be about people writing stories that are relevant to you. Like, national media, most of the national stories, they might be interesting. Like, we might think, but it's like entertainment. More than actual tangible stories that will change your life for the better. And that's what politics should be as well. Like, your local politician should have the power to make choices that affect you and help you. And that's why ultimately we've entered a world now where sort of power is very centralized and homogenized, whereas actually it really needs to be redistributed more. And this is why, devolution and giving powers back to metro mayors or giving powers back to Scotland and Wales is so important, because people need to be able to hold their local politicians accountable. And they need to be able to see that change. And not only see it, but enact it.
Perhaps the people living in an area know best as well.
Yeah.
That's,
of course, yeah. And every Westminster bubble may not know what is best for British public.
North Wales, or
and I think that it ultimately comes down to this.
I mean, politicians come from, like, they represent areas that they have no affiliation with.
No. Well, they get parachuted into seats so that they can win a safe seat. But this is why we ultimately at the moment think that the Green Party are being so successful, is that they have a real representative base, that many of their leaders and MPs and members are representative of a broad coalition of people. And I think that that's so important, because representation doesn't guarantee that the politicians will act in your interest, but it makes it more likely. And that's the point, is that ultimately we really need to improve our odds of change that would be better for us all.
Yeah, I mean, any more to add there, I think?
I mean, just final thoughts on the conversations we had is that I would say I came away feeling hope that actually many of the people there, that many of the far-right activists could see that inequality was a big issue. Like, obviously they hold these racist views, but I think that they recognise, they see the arguments, they see the logic behind them for the inequality being the biggest issue. And actually, I think that, there's a huge proportion of the British public right now who might be thinking that, migration is the biggest problem, or not a huge proportion, but, a reasonable one, who are intelligent people. And if we can change the information they're seeing, and we can change the narrative and give them the one that actually, it's the wealthiest who are hoarding resources and are after your house, and will buy your house if inequality continues to decrease, to increase as it is. If they can get that information, they may change their minds. There'll always be people who will hold on to these really racist ideas, but it's
at least that acknowledgement that is of wealth inequality.
Well, I think that's the thing, is like, they may hold their racist ideas even while being able to vote for a government that is about actually fixing the problems. And even if they're racist, which, hopefully that can be educated out, because clearly these arguments are nonsensical, but if it can be, they can still recognise that, like, deportations and the racist agenda will not fix their country. And I think, unfortunately for Americans, but maybe fortunately for Brits, we can see that Trump's agenda of deportations, of incredibly racist immigration policy, is making the economy worse.
Yeah, and it's not only that; it's turning some of his major, loudest supporters against him.
Yeah, because
take Theo Von, for example,
or Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
both of them. They see the cruelty and the joy that some of the Trump administration take in separating families, in arresting children, and they can see that is cruel. It's not about fixing an economy. It's not about fixing national security. It's not about improving working people's conditions. It's simply racism and cruelty that are driving their decisions. It's hate. And hate is a great motivator, but ultimately hate is not something that will give you a fulfilling life.
Yep. So I guess I think we've done a pretty good job there, to be honest.
Hope so.
Yeah, hope so.
Well, obviously I was in the conversation, so what did you think? Do you think that, were you left feeling that there was a possibility of, changing their mind?
Because we'd filmed that segment, we then kind of got talking to other parts, didn't we? Yeah. Separated, so to speak. But, people come up to you and they'd be like, I want mass remigration. And you're like, well, let's just talk about that for a moment. and then people did actually start to back down, and then it was more like, oh no, we just want, like measured migration. And I think this is the thing, is that people have, for me, it comes back to austerity, because I did a lot of work with the Manchester mental health crisis, and I'll keep banging on about that till probably the end of time now. But you can actually see, it'll be on my gravestone, Manchester. but that it's just such a clear example of how bad the effects of austerity have got. And I think this is the thing, is that people didn't vote for unchecked immigration, and I think that's what they feel is happening now. But if people actually felt that we had like an efficient asylum seeking process, and one that, for example, migration, like people felt that there was an element of control to it, I think that could make a difference. But right now we live in a country where public services are not even crumbling, have crumbled. I would go so far to I don't know. It's just so bad.
I saw that there's a council. I can't remember which council, but apparently there's a council that's so bankrupt that they've said that they will not grit some roads this year. So it's down to the residents to grit their own roads, and that is that a country that's working?
And say someone crashes on one of them now,
well, of course,
someone forgets to grit
that's it. That's the thing, isn't it? And then the costs that NHS costs there, or the costs are passed on, aren't they? And that's the whole thing. Is Zach Polanski was really good when he talked about cost multipliers. You spend more money into public services and you get more out of it at the end. But it works the other way. You strip more money out the public, that costs you more in the end.
And we have spoken to Dr. John Mulligan on a podcast, and he's laid out the numbers about evidence-driven decision making. And I feel like I am hopeful, because I think at some point we may be able to reverse the effects of austerity. And at that point, people can actually think that this country is working for them. Yeah. But the point is people feel like the country is not working for them, and that people are coming over here to take their jobs. And while they feel like their resources are getting smaller, they look to other people to blame it on. And then why am I? And this is the thing, isn't it?
That's it.
It's about pointing the finger.
I think the government that finally addresses inequality will be a historically famous government. They will be a government that we look back on with the same kind of positivity as the government that brought in the NHS. The Attlee government. The government that finally addresses wealth inequality, they will be the government that go down in history. And who those politicians are will have to put up with so much, but they will be doing it for a greater, bigger purpose. And that's the thing, is that once a politician or a government does that, it will set in motion the wheels of rebuilding trust in politics. People will say, do you remember this politician? Do you remember what this government did? Do you remember
an actual legacy? Do
you remember the things that they did for us, not for corporate lobbyists, not for the top wealthy the top 50 wealthiest families, not for Rishi Sunak's billion pound family, and I think that's the thing to try and encourage our politicians to do, is to say, do you want to go down in history as the most unpopular government ever, or do you want to be the government that set in motion the wheels of change?
Yeah, and whether that's possible, I don't know, but I just think we went and actually spoke to people on the far right. So when people put in the comments now, you never speak to people on the far right. Well, we did. So,
Yeah, we did.
And it didn't change our minds as well. For all these reasons that we've just laid out for you. So that's why I really wanted to do this today, just to say we've done it for you. So stop complaining at least about that. But yeah, I mean, like, look, you put a video on Facebook about a community not wanting to stand for racism, and it gets hit with another barrage of hate. So, look, we're going to keep trying. We're not going to stop. So bring it on.
Yeah, and just ask yourself as well, if you think you've got sort of hateful views, just think about what it's doing to you. Just think, do you think it's making you a better person? And do you think it's making your community better? Do you think it's making the world a better place? Or do you think actually if you showed people some empathy and some sympathy, what do you think that would do to you? Do you think it would make you better? I think it would. I think it would make your community better because they'd see that you're a better person for it. And those kind of small changes, if a lot of people did it, it would make a big, big difference.
Yeah, I mean, coming up to Christmas, just think about Scrooge, Christmas Carol. He figured it out. Right. On that note, thank you for listening and staying with us. And look, sound like a bit of a broken record, but we do really appreciate all the support and everything. So even a like, subscribe, or even a recommendation to a friend, it goes a long way.
Yeah, it helps us keep making content, and really we want to, again, like we said, help change that kind of narrative. And ultimately, if us and the broader community who are trying to do that, if we are successful, maybe our public services will be better in the future. And so that's ultimately the project that we're trying to build. It's not just for us, it's for all of us.
Yeah. So yeah, we're not lacking ambition, put it that way. But yeah. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.